Welcome back to the T.C.G.B.C. On this edition, we'll be talking about gateway games and party games.
Welcome back, everyone. Once again, I'm joined by our top board game analysts. I've got Corey, Ryan, Nick, and Jerch on the far right there. But with that, I don't think we need any further introductions. You can see the previous video if you want to know a little bit more about us. Let's jump right into the nominees for the Gateway Game category. Nick, take it away.
This year's nominee for Best Gateway Game go to Ticket to Ride, Alan Moon, Days of Wonder, Carcassonne, Klaus Gershon Reed, Hans In Gluck, Machikoro, Masao Suganuma, Grounding, Splendor, Marc Andre, Space Cowboys, Betrayal at the House on the Hill, Bruce Glasgow, Avalon Hill, Wizards of the Coast. Azul, Michael Kiesling, Next Move Games. Wandering Towers, Michael Kiesling, Wolfgang Kramer, Capstone Games. Santorini, Gord, Roxley. Stockpile, Brett Sobel, Seth Van Orden, Navu Games. Queen Domino, Bruno Catala, Blue Orange. Downforce, Rob Davio, Restoration Games. The Crew, Thomas Singh, Cosmos. Marvel United, Andrea Charvesio, Eric Lang, Simon. The Exit Games, Inca Brand, Marcus Brand, Cosmos. Now let's get to the table and see which of these games makes it to the final bracket.
All right, that's quite the list of nominees. Jumping right into this one, Jerch or Corey, is there anything that stands out right away? We've got 14 games here that we need to get down to 8.
Well, I think one we can talk about right away is Queen Domino.
Yes.
Because that is in multiple categories, and I think that the committee has decided that we're moving that one into the tile placement.
I think it fits best there. I would argue if you're going to talk about a gateway game, maybe King Domino would maybe fit here, but Queen Domino is a little more advanced, and I know I give it to everyone as a gateway game, but I definitely think it is a quintessential tile placement game. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So we'll get that one out of here right off the bat.
All right.
Other surprises in this category, Ryan? Anything that you think stands out, doesn't belong?
There's a lot of games that I have not played, so those stand out, but that doesn't mean that they're not great gateway games. I just happen to get, Azul is a great game. I've taught a lot of people that game. Stockpile, outstanding game, easy to get into. Splendor has been a gateway game for 15 years, 20 years, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Carcassonne, even longer than that. Ticket to Ride, how many decades? I don't know.
Yeah, I think on some of these we can even start there, like Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, Splendor, maybe even Azul at this point. These are all games that I don't know how you can consider them top tier gateway games to this point today, even though some of them have been around forever.
With 13 games left that we have to get cutting down to 8, I feel like this is where people are going to start to put their golden stamp of approval on it to force one of these games to move on, because we've got to cut 5 games from this list. So I think that this is where people are really going to start to throw their weight behind what ones they want to keep.
Corey, what are your thoughts on a game like Machikoro? Originally, I thought this is a very gateway-ish game, but I think it requires you to understand more of the background behind like deck builders in general. It is pretty basic, but I don't know if it quite fits here or has the popularity of some of these other games.
I just don't like the game. I don't like Machi Koro. I like Space Base better, and Space Base does kind of a similar thing to Machi Koro. And it was one that was kind of a flash in the pan and kind of a hit when it first came up, but you don't hear it talked about as much anymore. I think some of these others that we mentioned are more mainstays, like the Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, Splendors, Azul. Those are like the top 4 that I typically mention or typically hear other people mention right off the bat when they mention gateway games to new gamers.
Yep.
So
I'd agree with that.
I think we could get rid of Machi Koro.
How about games like Wandering Tower, Santorini, Stockpile? I don't know if those are games that necessarily someone who's new to the hobby have heard of before or would see somewhere accessible as a gateway game that would get them into the hobby. I know a lot of these are simpler, really focused mechanically games, but are they things that someone's going to stumble on and become part of this hobby?
So my thing about Stockpile that comes to mind immediately is it's a theme that is a little more has a little more of a niche to it because it does involve some minor. I mean, it's a great introductory to how the stock market works, but also it has this kind of theme that if you're have no interest in financial stuff, you might not be immediately interested in playing Stockpile opposed to some of these other more generically themed games like Santorini. Yes, it's got a Greek theme, but it has no connection actually to Greece and the other games that we've already listed off that will probably already make the list. So that's my one comment on Stockpile.
Mm-hmm.
I'd agree with that. I just don't think it contends into this bracket.
Yeah, it's a great game. Everyone should play it, but
Yeah.
that's fine.
Maybe a next step, not a gateway.
And I'm not familiar with Wandering Towers at all. I don't know if anyone else is on the panel.
Yeah, I put it on there. It's a newer game. It's by Michael Kiesling. Same design duo that does a lot of more strategy heavy games, and they came out with a gateway game that's really new that a lot of people haven't heard of. So I could see it not being on the list.
It just doesn't have the staying power yet. This might be a contender as its base for being known as a gateway game grows.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe this doesn't make the 2024 nominee or bracket pool.
So, two surprising things that I did want to mention a little earlier when we were talking about that is, first of all, a lot of these games actually aren't necessarily like themed for children, and that's something I think normally when you talk about a gateway game, you think of like as an adult getting into the hobby, but really you could argue that it's meant. You could look at that through the lens of, hey, you're trying to get your child into the hobby, and these games probably can be played by kids, but not some of them are not going to be able to get played by like a 4 or 5 year old, which I've just found interesting. And I think that's something in the hobby when you think of gateway game, you're not necessarily thinking of like as a kid a gateway game, but more as an adult. Mm-hmm. Second comment is the lack of cooperative games. For me personally, I think you have to start with a cooperative game, because if you play a competitive game and someone has a bitter experience because they lost, and that could negatively impact their future feeling of hobby board games forever. So with that said, Pandemic is not on this list. I didn't include it because I felt someone else would include it. Now it's
another game I didn't see is Settlers of Catan.
Yeah, that's fair.
Might be elsewhere in the bracket, but I feel like when you talk gateway games, that's one of the first ones someone
mentions. So another
mentions.
surprise, for sure. Another surprise.
Yep.
Happy not to see it, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a huge fan. Hopefully we're not.
It's a good variety, yeah.
Like,
it gets better the more times you play it.
Upsetting part of our fan base,
It
but
gets much worse the more
Well,
times you play.
I think
the
Nick
curve
brought up
goes
some
like
really
this.
good points.
yep.
And I think that goes into why Pandemic probably isn't on the committee's list, is because even though it is a cooperative game you're working together, I don't know if it's quite gateway, because so often in a game like Pandemic, somebody comes along and it's kind of the quarterback for the whole experience.
Yep.
So then even if you understand and you're learning mechanics of how to play a game, you're not really playing that one a lot of times. And I mean, you've got Pandemic Legacy where there's fun things you can do. You've got some of the newer offshoots that are trying to make it a little bit more engaging, where more people are doing things. But that one was left off, I feel like, because it's not really getting a whole lot of people in the hobby. It's probably necessary for your collection if you're a collector of games, but that one is so skewed towards a one-person heavy experience, where a lot of these other ones aren't. And then that leads me to asking Nick, which of these do you think best exemplifies kind of the cooperative experience or kind of bringing in a younger audience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's where I feel like a game like The Crew
Yeah.
is a good addition on this list. I think that's a very good entry level. Like, if someone's played Hearts or a trick-taking game before, they're already going to have that experience coming into a more board game-esque game like The Crew, and I think that's a strong contender for this. Games I'm not so certain about are like Marvel United, Exit games. I've never played either of them. Not sure how, I guess, Nick, these are maybe nominees from your end, but I'm not sure how these fit the gateway game. Like, if you were to pick between one of the two, what's more gateway-esque and known that way?
Yeah, so I would say in general they're not maybe known in the hobby board gaming community as unanimous gateway games, but why I pick Marvel is it's cooperative and it's got an IP that a lot of people that maybe aren't into hobby board games would gravitate to. It's like, oh, do you want to play a Marvel board game? Maybe, okay, fine. And it's cooperative, so then again, from a rules playing perspective, they don't have to feel they need to know how to play the game. And the Exit games is for those people that are anti-board game and you're saying it's not really a board game, and try to get people into the hobby that way by playing something that's very tangentially related to board gaming but not quite a board game, and it's cooperative, and it's a game where everyone that eliminates the alpha gamer syndrome that Jerch was talking about, that I agree is a real problem for games like Pandemic, because in the Exit games, I haven't played many of them, but I did play one recently called I think it was the Cabin, Escape from the Cabin, and everyone gets to introduce their own skills into that because there's different puzzles, and some people at the table might be good at certain puzzles and word puzzles opposed to number puzzles, so everyone brings in their unique strengths. So do they deserve to be on this list compared to some of these other games? Maybe not. But between those two, I guess I would say the Exit games, just because it's a little more of a novel type of board game experience that might open up the doors to someone who's been traditionally in their life against board gaming, since it doesn't look like a board game right at face value opposed to something like Marvel United.
Would an Exit game appeal to a gateway gamer because you're tearing up the game as you play, and then they're just like, oh, my game is now ruined for my first game?
It's a fair point. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking of the hobby board gamer being the person playing the Exit game and bringing in people, not the other way around, like telling a new gamer to buy it, and then to that point,
Not forcing them to buy a game that they then destroy.
That's true.
Yeah, my counter argument to anyone who says stuff like that is the movie theater is like $10 per kid for 1-2 hour experience. You're paying $40 to go to the movie theater. Like, what's that difference in a one-time game experience?
Yeah.
That's
100%
fun.
agree with that.
Yeah.
So what do we think on those last two games? Exit games seem to be making the cut. It sounds like Nick, the expert here, would lean that direction.
I'm on board with that too.
And don't get me wrong, I did put Exit just because that's the first brand that came to mind. There's also Unlocked. Actually,
right,
I might actually like Unlocked more. Now that does use an app, and I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the app because required something digital.
Yep.
But with those Unlocked games, you don't have to tear them apart. And it's a great integration of technology with board games, even though it does still require you to use app. So, but for the sake of having an actual game in the category, I went with Exit games.
Yeah, I think that
You
makes
get rid
more
of
sense
Marvel
to me.
United.
But I was,
But still leaves us at 9 games.
So then we need to start ranking where we're at and see what's going to be.
I feel like we can't remove...
I have a question.
Yeah.
How many of you actually enjoy playing Ticket to Ride?
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, the new one is.
I like griefing people in it more than anything. But yes, I enjoy it.
Fair enough. All right.
Yeah.
And we're doing a legacy campaign.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
The Legacy has been good.
Yeah.
The original was a game I had purchased and gotten rid of.
Yeah.
That's
As
the
is
question.
many of your collection, is you purchased and got rid of and then probably repurchased.
Yeah.
And then got
Yeah.
rid of again.
Probably only several hundred.
But I think the thing about a gateway game is it not necessarily needs to be enjoying to yourself at this point as someone who knows all the different types of hobby games that exist.
Yeah, that's a fair
Because I agree, I
That's
don't
a
find
fair
it
point.
entertaining, but if you're someone that's never really gotten to board gaming, it could be a game that's appealing, has a mass
Yes,
appeal.
fair
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, we're getting back to the real coverage here. All right, of these 9 remaining games, we have the difficult decision of cutting out one game whose portfolio does not line up with this category. And I'd have to say the top 5 here that I don't know how we could get rid of are Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, Splendor, Betrayal at House on the Hill, Azul. One thing I really like on here, but maybe can be argued is maybe too difficult, is a game like Downforce. Great game. But is that a gateway game compared to a game like Santorini, The Crew, Exit Games?
I've not played Santorini. I don't know how good that is as a gateway game.
Corey's the expert here then. I know he's played both.
Santorini, there's 2 versions to play the game. You can play the basic version, or you can play where everybody gets an asymmetric god power at the beginning of the game, which throws a little bit of wrench into it. It makes it a little bit more complex, but essentially you're moving a piece and building a piece of the tower. And as you build pieces of towers around the board, you can hop up 1 layer at a time. If you get to the 3rd layer of a tower, you win the game. So it's very simple. You move, build, adjacent to yourself. Move, build, adjacent to yourself. Move again. Oh, there's already a piece of the tower. I can now build a 2nd level to that because I'm adjacent to it. So that's the basic version of it. Really simple. I would say that it is definitely a gateway game. Is it one that's talked about a lot? I think a lot of people write it off. I would say no. Maybe people write it off as it looking too much like a children's game, when really it's not as much, and one that I still really enjoy. Let me look at
If you had to say in general, if you're looking at gateway games, what's gonna hit the top point for you between Downforce or Santorini?
Downforce was such a nice game to bring multiple people into the hobby as a group, and kind of that. It was kind of a cooperative experience, even though it wasn't a cooperative game, because you're all kind of rallying around. It was very simple. Just play a card. Whatever the card says, the color of cards, you do that. You just do it. Whatever. Yeah. It's simple. It's super simple. So,
I personally would say Downforce.
Yep.
Just based on my experiences. I guess I don't know what the board game hobby group thinks about that, but I would argue everyone here.
I mean, I will say I got Santorini specifically for my parents who aren't really into board gaming, because I thought it would be a simple enough game that they could play, because of, as Corey explained, it's literally you just move a character.
You move and you build.
And you move and build. And then the asymmetry is imposed in the game by which god you start with at the start of the game, and then you only have to worry about that one new nuance unique to your one character. So you could literally play the same character every single time.
So what was the lesson here?
Did your parents like that game?
Did it make them play more games?
No.
All right, I think we have our answer there. I've had multiple people play Downforce, love it, play more.
How many does it play up to, by the way?
8.
Yeah, so I think the reason why I was going to say that I like Downforce is you can get a lot of people to play at once.
Yeah.
Which is a great to introduce coworkers. If you have 8 more people, more bang for your buck, so to speak.
Yep. So there, we've gotten through the first challenge here. We've narrowed down to 8 gateway games. Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, Splendor, Betrayal at House on the Hill, Azul, Downforce, The Crew, and Exit Games. Now we have to seed these, all with very good resumes. Some of these have been in the hobby for as long as I've been alive, probably.
Many years.
Some are favorites to the group, I think, as a gateway game. Gonna be very curious how the panel wants to seed this. The only argument I think I'd make is, out of all of them, I'd say Exit Games is the weakest link. I don't know if anyone would disagree with that. I mean, Nick, it even seemed earlier you would probably agree with that.
Talking about niche in the hobby game realm, I think Exit or escape room games is kind of that niche market.
Right.
So it's a little bit harder to get people, or easier to get people involved who don't typically like board games. But I think for somebody who's like, yeah, I like board games, I like Monopoly and things like that, I think that might be a tougher sell.
Agree with that. If it's someone who's used to playing that type of game like Monopoly, then it's not really as good of a gateway per se.
George, what's standing out as like top 3 here?
I think for me, Ticket to Ride was a game that was played early on. I think when I talk to people casually, Betrayal at House on the Hill is one that a lot of people have played once or heard of. But then what was a gateway game for me, especially in talking cardboard, was Splendor. Mm-hmm. Like, that is the definition of a gateway game, because that got me into this group. I remember after playing it, Corey, at your old house, that I just fell in love with that game, and then I bought it from you.
Yeah.
So that one has a personal connection to me. And I think that those three are kind of the tier above. And I wonder, is the gateway game that got you into the board game hobby, is that on this list for these final 8?
Carcassonne is a game I played early on.
Yeah.
Nothing else on this list was even close to Carcassonne in time frame. Maybe Ticket to Ride. One thing to also note on here is that both Splendor and Ticket to Ride are games that are part of the World Series of Board Gaming. Very popular, still in the scene. Strong contenders for top seeds, I'd say. I know they're games we don't get to the table often, but I think it's just hard to argue that those two may not be the top 2 gateway games on our list.
Those are definitely the top 2 seeds in this.
I don't know, Ryan or Corey, any thoughts on 1 or 2, or 3? Where are we sitting with some of these games?
For me personally, probably out of all these games, Betrayal is very high, if not number 1. I think it's, is it a perfect game? Absolutely not. There has a lot of trouble, but name a time that you played Betrayal that you didn't have a lot of fun. Everybody at the table has a lot of fun. It's different every time. It's a great experience, especially for a person sitting down to board games for the first time to be like, oh wow, this is way different than Monopoly or Life or some other game.
I would say my one argument to that is, though, if the new gamer at the table is the trader halfway through the game, and they're like, hey guys, I don't know what I'm doing. This game just turned into I don't know what I'm doing, and you guys do, and I give up.
Fair point. Yeah, absolutely fair point.
Corey, what are you thinking?
I think it comes down to millions of games sold, how many iterations of the game, how popular it is. Ticket to Ride takes the cake on that. Carcassonne has had many iterations as well and has withstood the test of time. Those two are, and again, Splendor has millions sold now too, but Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne are the oldest games on the list that have withstood the test of time and have multiple versions of it.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I think if I was looking at this, I'd almost go right down kind of how these were nominated. You got Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, Splendor, Betrayal. I know Betrayal is a favorite at the table as a gateway game, but I just think those top 3, they're just so hard to beat when you look at their resume from how they performed since they've been released, how long they've been around, just their popularity in other board game tournaments. They're just too strong, I think. Yeah.
Go ahead.
That leaves us with the bottom half of the bracket to fill in. We've got Downforce, The Crew, Azul.
I think you have to do Azul at 5.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like that's a very good abstract.
6.
Yep.
Yeah, I think
it's just so much more widely played than Downforce.
Yep, I would agree. That was really easy. I'm glad we had a lot of unanimous decisions there. There you have it. Our gateway game bracket. Let's just get some quick thoughts on this one. Church, anything here that you think is going to be a big upset? Who you think is going to win?
I think that this one has a lot of ways it could go because of the personal connection that the voting audience will have to any of these games.
100%.
So this will be the least predictable out of any of the regions. I think that Betrayal at House on the Hill, even if it's not the first game that a person's ever played, it probably is their first indelible game memory because it's the one where halfway through there's a twist and somebody now is against everybody else. And
if they haven't played the game before, they might not even know that was going to happen.
So that's like a core memory for a lot of board gamers. I think that that's the one, even though it's correctly seeded for, I think that's the one that's going to come out of this region.
And it's going up against Azul.
Yes, which is a tough game. It's a good game.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Azul Betrayal is probably the most interesting matchup here. But yeah, I think there could be huge surprises. Any of these games, I think, could win. Exit games, I think, won't win. But yeah, any of the other ones I could see winning for sure.
I think this list might be the most entertaining category for me to watch because I feel now that we're more into the hobby board game side of things for years and years now, we're the most disconnected from this list out of any other category.
These are going to be very fun to play regardless of what game makes the tournament. Super excited for this one. And figuring out scoring on a game like Betrayal at House on the Hill. So, super excited to see what happens here. But I think we've seen the bracket. Good things to come. Let's jump over to our next region, which will be the party games. Corey, what do you have for us?
And this year's nominees for party games are Niet, Stefan Dura, Yellow. Downforce, Rob Davio, Restoration Games. The Resistance, Don Eskridge, Indie Boards and Cards. Skull, Harvey Marley and Lou Meme. Camel Up, Stefan Bogan, Eggertspiel. No Thanks, Thorsten Gimler, Amigo. When I Dream, Chris Darchalis, Repos Production. Codenames, Vlada Shavadl, CGE. Captain Sonar, Roberto Fraga, Johan Lemonier, Madigo. And those are this year's nominees for party games. Let's get back to the table and see what we pick.
Thanks, Corey. What a great list of party games. This one, there was a lot of crossover in the selection committee nominees. We actually only have 9 games to choose from, which should make this pretty easy to cut down to 8. You have really good games on here. One thing I do find a little questionable, and maybe we'll make this a 5-minute cut, is Downforce came up again.
Yeah.
Also was on our Gateways game. I'm not saying we can't have a game in 2 categories, but if we're looking for simplicity, is that something we cut? I mean, we have other great games on here like Niet, The Resistance. I know that's a favorite of those in the group. I haven't played Skull or Camel Up. No Thanks. That's another big hit that's been at some of our Extra Life marathons. I know Corey has brought out When I Dream. That's been pretty fun. Messing with people with the blindfold up. Messing with people while they have the blindfold on. Hilarious. Can't get enough. Codenames, super popular. Captain Sonar, another great game if you can get 8 people to the table and actually somehow coordinate that in any way or fashion.
But that's why it's a good party.
Yeah, it's what makes it fun. I don't know. This seems pretty cut and dry. Downforce,
Downforce
gone.
Yep, that has to be off the list.
Now, much more difficult.
Ranking.
Seeding these. So personally, games I'm looking at just based on popularity, Codenames, The Resistance.
Yeah.
Those are probably right up there.
Those would be my 1 and 2.
Yep.
I would probably start with Codenames as number 1. I feel like that splashed recently. There's hundreds of variations now. I don't know how this isn't our number 1.
Yeah, that can be one. It's not my favorite in this region, but that can definitely be number 1.
And then I would probably go down to the Resistance. You know, there's multiple iterations of this game between Secret Hitler, Coup,
The Werewolf.
Werewolf Words or whatever.
Yeah, social deduction in general.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. We have to just have to pick one game. So.
Yep. Now it gets a little more cloudy. You had a trick-taking game. Corey, I don't know what Skull or Camel Up are. Anyone clarify?
Definitely
kind of where
can.
those
Those were
fit?
not my picks.
Yep, I can definitely add to those. So Skull is a little of deductive reasoning and push your luck. And it's a game that I have that we'll have to bring to the table sometime, but you're wagering how many tiles you can flip over between yourself and the people around you that are flowers or safe before you get to a skull. And as you go around the game, you're putting either a flower tile or a skull tile in front of you, or you're deciding, all right, I'm going to try to go for the points and say, all right, Ryan, you're going to flip yours up, flower. Corey, you're going to flip yours up, flower. I'm going to flip mine, flower, flower. I win.
Interesting.
There's social deduction. It's push your luck. I've played it a couple of different times at conventions with various groups of people. It's a really fun communal game. The rules are very easy, and I think that is one that if we haven't played it, we need to get it to the table pretty soon, because there's a lot of player-to-player interaction, which is what you want for the category.
Yes, 100%.
And if you're ever at someone's house who doesn't have drink coasters, they're on drink coasters.
You end with a whole game of drink coasters.
There
Yes.
you go.
How about Camel Up?
Camel Up was a recent one that I just played with an eclectic group of gamers. And what it is you've got camels that are racing around a track, and then you are wagering on which ones are going to win. So it's similar to kind of like Downforce or other racing type games.
Sure.
But there's a lot of kind of crazy mechanics that are going on. So people are rooting for things together, or camels can start going in reverse when they jump on top of another camel. So there's a lot of community that's built, a lot of camaraderie, and it's a very fun, lighthearted game. So I think that one is also, especially if you're thinking a party,
Yep.
and you've got a lot of people from different walks of life getting together. Here's a simple thing. We've got colored camels that are going around, and you bet on which one you think is going to win.
Easy.
How many
Yeah.
players in Camelot total?
That is a really good question. I believe we had 6. I think that's one that scales a little bit larger. Not quite as large as some of the other games on the list.
Right,
Yep.
but still a big one.
Yeah, so that's why I thought that it was a worthy inclusion on this list.
Just looking at a 3 seed, I will say that No Thanks got multiple nominations from the selection committee. I don't know if there's anyone here that would disagree with that being a top contender in the bracket.
It's a fun game.
Yeah.
It
It's
scales up
easy.
real nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From there, I think it gets a little harder. We have some niche games that I've never played, but I would argue all these seem to fit the criteria very, very well. I think it just comes down to strength of what a party game is.
Yeah, I was gonna say my one comment was with Niet that can only go up to 5.
Yes.
So when I think of party, I do think I guess at least 6 players.
Sure. Yep.
I mean,
I can see
ideally
that being a
8.
lower seeded or 8 seed being a little weaker.
Oh, that would be a sleeper if that was 8 seed.
We're going with it.
Oh,
I think
They
based,
don't
man.
vote names.
I think based on this list, that one, it's a little light on the player count. It is trick taking.
Yeah, throw it back to me when we start talking about upsets because I might have some comments on that one.
And then in the middle here, it kind of gets hard. I don't know a lot about Skull or Camel Up. When I Dream, I do know. Very good abstract
Yeah, it's a fun game.
Pictionary style game. I would say that's probably my number 4. So this brings us to the middle of the bracket. We've got Skull, Camel Up, Captain Sonar. Unfortunately, I think Jurch, you're the only one who played all 3 of these.
Yes. I think that if we're talking about how to rank these for general preference, Captain Sonar is probably the highest because it's really it's a good game to rope a large group of people in. Everybody has their specific role, and once you get the game rolling, I feel like that is most inclusive to people. Out of those 3, I personally like it the least because it's hectic, and if you don't understand or like your role, then you're out of luck for a very loud, obnoxious game.
Is it very complex?
Some of the roles are.
It is more of a complex
That's
game.
why I was one.
Yes.
I would love to play that game.
Yes. If you get the right crew and this is not a beginner game,
Yeah.
then it's fun. But
Yeah.
you can definitely help your teammates along.
Sure.
But if you don't know what's going on, you can often feel like that you're not only hindering your experience, but the experience of other people as well.
And I think something we should all be aware of too in a party game, if you're probably playing at a party and maybe you've been having some
Yes.
foods and beverages and playing something with a little bit of complexity might derail things quickly.
Yes, and I think that is the most complex. I would still rank it the highest, but I have the least confidence in that game moving on from this region.
What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I love Captain Sonar, but it's because it's madness. I mean, yes, I agree. Like, if you're not happy with the role or you're not good at it, you can feel. But I feel like it's so chaotic and it's so fast that I feel like everybody sort of feels that way, unless you're like some sort of expert Captain Sonar player. But yeah, I agree. Like, it's not.
Thinking
for
it's coming towards the rear end of the bracket
Yes.
here, slightly above Niet. Church, I guess this comes down to your expertise on Skull and Camel Up. What beats what? What's our 5 or 6?
I have played Camel Up as well, just not Skull.
Oh, gotcha. What
So-
do you guys think?
Great contribution.
Well, yeah, weigh in on it.
I would say, I mean, I haven't played Skull, but I know what Skull is about.
Yeah.
I think that would be an easier one to introduce to a wider audience of people, for sure. So I think if we're going based on that, party games, can you bring it to every party? Or do you have to ask questions ahead of time on who's going to be there, what's their knowledge on this and that? I think Skull would win out in that essence. But yeah, what do you think, Church?
Well, I think that then we need to play Skull so you all can be convinced that it's a pretty good game.
That seems fair to me.
Yep, let's put that one ahead.
Easy,
so what
5,
rank is
6.
that?
5 for Skull.
Okay.
6 is Camel Up. But yeah, pretty easy there on party games. That is our bracket. Church, you mentioned you wanted to be talking about potential upsets here. Who do you think is going to make it out of this region? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the creative side of party games, mostly because I feel like either I'm put on the spot, or if you don't have a mental vibe with some of the people that you're playing it with, if it's like a team game, then it can be very stressful. So I personally am not a huge fan of code names. And yet, Nick, I remember when you brought that over, it just clicked. Like with me, it was so much fun. It got a bunch of different people engaged. It was high energy, trick taking, so you can start to get into the strategy of it. And I was able to bring it to my family, and I introduced that to non-board gamers, and they liked it as well. So I think out of any of these regions, regardless of what we've kind of seeded previously or will seed, I think this has the one opportunity to be an 8-over-1 upset.
That'd be pretty exciting.
And I know that it would bust a lot of people's brackets if that actually happened. But I just think that seeding, how that goes, that Niet is much more my style, and the people that I've introduced, and frankly, a lot of people that I hang out with kind of like Niet. Codenames has much more wide appeal,
Yep,
but I'm hoping
agree.
that the Niet people would be able to come in and vote and dethrone that number 1 seed right in its first matchup.
Yeah, Ryan, any thoughts on the bracket as a whole? Who do you think's going to win
Yeah, I
this
mean,
one?
I don't think that will happen. But I do see your point about like if you don't like being on the spot, or if you don't feel like like you mix it, if you're like new to a group and the game comes out, like you could feel maybe a little bit put off by that. But I do really like code names. I think for me, that or the Resistance are the two favorites for sure, which is why they're number one and two.
Yes, that's
The
going to be a
Resistance,
strong
absolutely.
contender. I think anyone that likes that style of social deduction is going to lean that way with games like Coup or Secret Hitler not making this list. So, yeah.
And I think When I Dream being at number 4 is out of left field. I don't think many people talk about this game, know about this game. I'm guessing that that's just going to be completely thrown out of the bracket in round 1 just for that sake. But if you haven't tried the game and you are voting the brackets, pick up When I Dream at your local retail store. Give it a shot, because it is a
And then maybe you'll come back and vote for it.
Maybe. I'm pulling for it.
Nick, any final thoughts on this region?
Yeah, so I was able to wait to get this into the nominations, but yeah, Secret Hitler was my number 1 personal favorite for a party game, but also again, the Resistance is very similar to that, and I have proven it's a great game because in 3 different groups of people I've introduced that game to that had really no background in playing board games, and every single group was obsessed with that game because no one could believe how bad people were at lying and how good people were at lying. And after every single game, there was all this huge discussion about what just happened, and everyone wanted to immediately play again. And I think Ryan's been talking about this too on the side that on Netflix there's now shows about social that our social deduction shows. I was watching the show Trader with my wife recently, which is basically a TV show about a social deduction game. So I think people really enjoy this type of game, and it's great for parties.
100% agreed. I think this bracket's going to be shaping up to maybe be the most explosive bracket, just because of people's thoughts on party games.
Yeah.
Going to be very, very interesting to see what happens here. That concludes our second video revealing the gateway and party game categories. That only leaves 4 more categories to reveal in our Talking Cardboard Championship Bracket series. As always, thank you for watching, and stay tuned as we get to reveal these last brackets. Take care.